The morning it happened, I had a cup of coffee in my hand and a stack of year-end reconciliation files under my arm. That was it. That was my whole world that Tuesday. I'd been the controller at Meridian Supply Group for 19 years. Not CFO, controller. There's a difference, and most people who've never worked in finance don't understand it. The CFO is the face. He goes to the board meetings, presents the numbers, shakes hands with the auditors when they walk in the door. The controller is the person who actually makes the numbers real, the one who knows why column J on sheet 4 doesn't match the general ledger from 2019 and why it doesn't have to, and how to explain that to a federal examiner without triggering a deeper review. That was me. For 19 years, that was me. My name is Albert. I'm 53 years old. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. I've been doing this kind of work since I was 24 years old, when I took a junior accounting position at a regional distributor that most people in this industry have forgotten about. I learned everything the hard way. Double-entry bookkeeping on paper ledgers before the software caught up. IRS correspondence audits before e-filing existed. Payroll tax deposits made by walking a check to the bank before the 3 p.m. cutoff. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you, so you understand what 19 years means. It means I was there before the company had a website. I was there when the founder's son, Colton, was still in high school. Colton was 31 when he took over. His father, who built Meridian from a small industrial parts distributor out of a warehouse in Dayton into a regional supplier with 17 locations across 5 states, had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He made the decision to step back gradually. He told the senior staff himself in the conference room on the 4th floor, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Because the man had integrity. He built something real, and he knew it, and he was honest about what was happening to him. He handed the keys to his son. I want to be fair to Colton. He wasn't stupid. He had an MBA from Vanderbilt. He'd done a 2-year stint at a consulting firm in Nashville before coming back to Dayton. He had energy, and he had ideas, and some of those ideas were actually good. He wanted to modernize the fleet management system. He wanted to renegotiate the carrier contracts. He wanted to open a distribution hub in Indianapolis that made geographical sense. Fine. All reasonable. But Colton also came in with a certain attitude that I recognized immediately, because I'd seen him before in younger managers who'd read too many business books and not enough balance sheets. He believed that the way things had been done was, by definition, the problem. That legacy meant liability. That anyone who'd been around long enough to remember how things used to work was, at best, a holdover, and at worst, an obstacle. He never said this to my face. Not directly. Not at first. What he did instead was start scheduling meetings I wasn't invited to, bringing in outside consultants to review processes I'd built, asking my assistant questions that he should have been asking me. Small things. The kind of things that, individually, you could explain away. But when you've been in an organization for 19 years, you develop a sense for the weather. You know when the temperature is changing. I requested a one-on-one with him in late October. We sat in his office, his father's old office, which he'd completely redecorated, new furniture, no photos on the walls. And I laid it out plainly. I told him that I'd noticed I was being excluded from certain conversations, that I wanted to understand my role going forward, that I was committed to the transition and willing to train whoever he wanted on whatever he needed. He smiled and told me I was indispensable. That word, indispensable. I've thought about it a lot since then. 3 months later, on a Thursday morning in January, Colton called an all-hands meeting. We had about 60 people in the Dayton office. They filed into the main conference room and the overflow stood in the hallway. I was sitting near the front because I always sat near the front. Old habit. He started by talking about the company's direction. New markets. New partnerships. A new operating philosophy he called lean and agile. He used the word disruption 4 times in the first 5 minutes. I counted. Then he said he had some personnel announcements to make. 2 promotions. 1 new hire. And then he looked directly at me and said that as part of the restructuring, the controller position was being eliminated and consolidated under the new CFO role, which would be filled by an external candidate. He said it just like that, in front of 60 people. The controller position is being eliminated. Not Albert is being transitioned. not "we're restructuring." He used the passive voice, the way people do when they want to announce a thing without attaching themselves to the decision, as if the position had simply ceased to exist on its own, like a species going extinct. I didn't say anything. I want to be clear about that, because people always ask. I didn't storm out. I didn't raise my voice. I sat there for the remaining 4 minutes of the meeting, and when it ended and people started shuffling out, some of them not making eye contact with me, some of them giving me that particular look that's half sympathy and half relief that it wasn't them, I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked back to my office. HR came to see me an hour later. Standard offboarding packet. 8 weeks of severance. COBRA information. A non-disparagement agreement. I signed what I had to sign and asked for my personal items to be boxed and sent to my home address. Before I left, I spent about 45 minutes doing something that nobody asked me to do, and that I was under no legal obligation to do. I documented everything I could document in the time I had, not the proprietary stuff. I wasn't going to touch that, and I didn't. What I documented was the operational knowledge, the things that lived in my head and nowhere else. I typed up a 4-page summary of the critical processes, the key contacts, the recurring deadlines, the things that would cause problems if someone didn't know about them. I saved it to the shared drive. I sent a copy to the CFO's search firm email address I found in Colton's calendar invite, just in case whoever was coming in would eventually see it. Then I packed my travel mug, my desk photo, and my 19-year-old Rolodex. Yes, I still kept a physical Rolodex, and I'm not apologetic about it, and I walked out. That was a Thursday. By Monday, I found out through a former colleague that the quarterly close process had stalled. Here's what nobody outside of finance understands about closing the books at a company with 17 locations. It is not a simple process. It never has been. At Meridian, specifically, it was complicated by the fact that we had 3 different inventory systems that had been acquired through 2 different acquisitions in 2009 and 2014, and those systems did not natively communicate with our primary accounting software. Over the years, I had built a series of manual reconciliation steps, what I called the bridge, that made everything line up. It wasn't elegant. It was the opposite of elegant. But it worked. And it worked because I had built it, and I was the only person who fully understood it. I had documented some of it. Over the years, I had asked twice, I want to be very clear, twice, with emails to confirm, to bring on a staff accountant specifically to cross-train on the bridge process. Both requests had been declined. Budget constraints, I was told. And then, later, under Colton's tenure, because we were moving toward a new integrated platform. The new integrated platform had been discussed for 2 years and implemented nowhere. So when I left on that Thursday, the bridge came with me. Not physically, not intentionally. It came with me because it existed in my head, built from a decade and a half of doing it by hand, every single quarter, and you can't transfer that in 45 minutes to a shared drive document. The external CFO, a man named Pierce, who I later learned had come from a logistics company in Charlotte, started in February. By March, the Q4 close still wasn't complete. That mattered enormously because Meridian had a revolving line of credit with a regional bank, First Heartland Commercial, out of Cincinnati, that had a covenant requiring audited financials within 90 days of fiscal year end. The fiscal year ended December 31st. 90 days is March 31st. I didn't know any of this was happening in real time. I had started consulting work. I had 2 small clients, both referred by people I'd known for years, and I was spending my days in my home office in the kind of productive quiet I hadn't experienced in nearly 2 decades. My wife thought I seemed lighter. My doctor noted my blood pressure had come down at my March checkup. I was sleeping 8 hours a night for the first time since my daughter was born. It was my old assistant. I'll call her Faye, which isn't her real name, because she's still there, and I don't want to create any difficulties for her, who called me in late March. She said she wasn't supposed to be calling me. She said things were bad. She said the auditors had been in 3 times and left frustrated each time because the numbers weren't reconciling and nobody could explain why. They keep asking about the bridge, she said. I told her I was sorry to hear it. Colton's been asking around about whether anyone has your contact information. I thanked her for letting me know and told her to take care of herself. 2 days later, Pierce called me directly. He was professional about it. He explained the situation clearly and asked if I'd be willing to consult on the reconciliation issue. I told him I charged $275 an hour and that I'd need a written engagement letter before I did anything. He said that was completely reasonable and asked me to send over my consulting agreement. I sent it. He signed it the same day. I won't tell you the exact number of hours it took because part of it was billed under confidentiality. But I will tell you that it was enough hours to make the severance Colton had paid me look like a rounding error on my invoice. The audit was completed in April. First, Heartland extended a temporary waiver on the covenant with conditions. The line of credit was preserved, but at a reduced limit and a higher rate. I was told, again, through Faye, that Colton had aged about 5 years between January and April. At some point in all of this, I received a LinkedIn message from him. He asked if I'd be open to a conversation. I read it twice, took a day to think about what I wanted to say, and then wrote back that I appreciated him reaching out, but that I was fully committed to my consulting practice and didn't have capacity for any ongoing engagements. Polite. Professional. True. What I didn't say, what I didn't need to say, because the invoice had already said it, was that this is what happens when you eliminate a role without understanding what that role actually does, when you make personnel decisions as performance, for an audience, because you want to look decisive in front of 60 people, when you call someone expendable in public without ever having taken the time to understand what they were holding together in private. I think about Colton's father sometimes. I think about the conversation I had with him maybe a year before his diagnosis, when we were both working late and he came by my office and we talked for about an hour about the company, about where it had been and where it was going. He understood every piece of what I did, not the technical specifics maybe, but the function of it. He knew that I was a load-bearing wall, and he treated me accordingly. His son saw a line item. Here's the thing about being a load-bearing wall. You don't look impressive. You're not the feature wall with the nice paint and the artwork. You're the one that, if you remove it, the ceiling comes down. And most people can't tell the difference until after the fact. I've had 3 full-time consulting clients since I left Meridian. One of them came directly from a referral. P.S. mate, the man I'd helped save the audit for. There's a particular irony in that, and I'll admit I've sat with it more than once. He turned out to be a decent professional in a bad situation that wasn't entirely of his making. I don't hate Colton. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy and maybe even satisfying to say that I do, and I don't. What I feel, mostly, is a kind of tired clarity. He made a choice that he thought was about modernization, and it turned out to be about pride. He wanted to walk into his father's company and immediately show everyone that the old way was gone and the new way was his, and he picked me as the symbol of the old way. He wasn't entirely wrong, I suppose. I was the old way. I was 19 years of accumulated institutional knowledge in a cardigan and sensible shoes. But the old way was also what was keeping the lights on, and he didn't know that until it wasn't there anymore. My daughter is 24 now. She's in her 2nd year at a regional accounting firm in Cleveland. We talk about work sometimes, and I find myself telling her things I wished someone had told me at her age. Things like, document your knowledge before someone else decides you don't need to be there to share it. Things like, your value is not always visible to the people who are evaluating it. Things like, if you ever find yourself being the only person who knows how something critical works, that's not job security, that's a single point of failure. And eventually, someone will decide the fault is yours. That last one I learned the hard way. I could have pushed harder, earlier, to bring someone up to speed on the bridge process. I could have made more noise about the cross-training requests. I could have documented more thoroughly, pushed for the integrated platform on a faster timeline, made myself less singular. I didn't. Partly because I was busy, partly because there's a certain human comfort in being needed, and partly because, I'll be honest, I didn't think anyone would actually be foolish enough to eliminate the role without understanding it first. That was my mistake. His mistake was thinking that disruption is a strategy. Real disruption, the kind that actually works, is built on understanding what you're disrupting before you start swinging. You don't tear out a wall because it looks old. You check the blueprints first. You figure out if it's structural. Colton didn't check the blueprints. I keep the Rolodex on my desk at home. My wife has suggested, very gently, more than once, that it might be time to retire it. But I like having it there. It represents something I believe in, which is that the work of building relationships and understanding systems is unglamorous and slow and almost never gets announced in an all-hands meeting. Nobody stands up in front of 60 people and says, "Here is the person who built the bridge that holds our numbers together." But when the bridge is gone, everyone notices. Last fall, I ran into one of Meridian's former regional managers at a trade conference in Indianapolis. He told me that Colton had brought in another round of consultants, that the new integrated platform was finally being implemented about 2.5 years behind schedule, and that things were stabilizing. "He mentions you sometimes," the man told me, "in the context of, lessons learned." I said that was good to hear, because that's the thing. I'm not interested in anyone's failure. I never was. I'm interested in the work being done right, in the knowledge being passed on, in the next generation of people coming up through organizations like the one I spent 19 years in, understanding that the person in the cardigan with the Rolodex and the 4-page process document might be the most important person in the building, even if they're never going to tell you so themselves. I drive past the Meridian building sometimes on my way to a client across town. The sign is still there. They're still operating. I hope they do well. I mean that. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the surface version, not the part where the sun fires the old guy and everything goes sideways, but the deeper mechanics of it. Why it unfolded the way it did. What was really at the center of the whole thing, and what I keep coming back to is this. Colton didn't fail because he was young. He didn't fail because he was ambitious, or because he wanted to change things. Those instincts, on their own, aren't problems. He failed because he made a decision at maximum visibility without doing the minimum amount of homework. He stood up in front of 60 people and announced a structural change that he didn't understand the structural consequences of. That's not boldness. That's the performance of boldness. And performances, eventually, meet reality. I've thought about my own role in it too, and I think that's the part people don't expect to hear, because it would be easy and honestly kind of satisfying to let the story end with Colton holding an invoice he didn't expect to pay and leave it at that. But that's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I let myself become irreplaceable in the wrong way. There's a version of being essential that's built on generosity. You share what you know, you bring people up alongside you, you make sure the work can survive you. And there's a version that's built on accumulation. You hold the knowledge. You answer the questions. You're always the one in the room who knows. I was doing the second one for years, and I told myself it was just efficiency. It wasn't. It was comfort, being the only one who understood the bridge felt, somewhere underneath everything, like security. And I was wrong about that, what I've learned. What I'd tell anyone who's building a career right now, the way I talk to my daughter about her work in Cleveland, is that real, professional integrity isn't just about doing your job well. It's about doing it in a way that the institution can survive without you. That's the harder discipline. That's the one that actually requires something from you, because it means giving away the thing that makes you feel necessary, and the resilience part. The part where I ended up okay, where the consulting practice grew, where Pierce sent me a referral 9 months after I'd helped clean up the mess, that didn't come from anger or from wanting to prove something. It came from having done the work for long enough that the work itself had a reputation. Nobody hired me because I'd outlasted Colton. They hired me because 19 years of doing something carefully leaves a trail that people can follow. That's the equation, as best I understand it. You do honest work for long enough, with enough attention to what's actually true, and that accumulates into something that can't be eliminated in an all-hands meeting. It can be ignored. It can be underestimated. But it doesn't disappear just because someone with a new office and a Vanderbilt MBA decides it does. The Rolodex is still on my desk. I'm keeping it there.